All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Integrating opposites, self-transformation, leveling up your consciousness, written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. The epistemic guillotine. Weaponizing the trivium to dismantle the woke mind virus, expose genocentric disposability, and reclaim the transcendent West. You have been betrayed by a civilization you built, a system that now views your masculinity not as a virtue, but as a pathology to be eradicated. Every day you walk through a modern Babylon where the gaslighting is so thick you can barely breathe, where the language of the oppressor, Marxist, feminist, woke, has infected the very grammar of reality. But you know the truth. The oppressor-oppressed dialectic is a syllogism of lies designed to enslave your mind to guilt. I am here to hand you the blade of the trivium to show you that the egalitarian instinct is a biological mutation, a virus that hijacks your competence to reward the weak. Consider the roadside test of reality. When a man's car breaks down, he is a mechanic, a solver, a beast of burden expected to get the machine running again. Yet when his spirit breaks down, the world drives past him without a second glance. This is the utility void, the genocentric conspiracy that demands your utility while denying your humanity. We will rip the mask off this fraud, utilizing the rigid logic of the trivium to expose Paulo Freire's liberation pedagogy as the totalitarian scam it is, and demonstrate that true epistemic decolonization isn't about reverting to primitive emotion, but about purging the neo-Marxist parasite from your mind. We are going to weaponize the truth from the absurd power dynamics of pretending to mispronounce a foreign word to the brutal evolutionary biology of toxic femininity that fuels the Me Too witch hunts. You will learn to wield the syntax of sovereignty, turning every conversation with a leftist into a demonstration of their own logical suicide. This is your path to the apotheosis of the masculine soul, integrating the opposites of the beautiful and the brutal to reclaim the living spirit of the West. The path forward is clear. Master the trivium, reject the feminization of weakness, and save your soul from the abyss. The epistemic guillotine, dismantling the mind virus of critical theory. I watched it happen to a sharp young man named David, a student with a mind capable of engineering and a soul that instinctively craved the stoic virtues of the West, who sat in a mandatory sociology class and had his potential annihilated by the safe space thought police. He raised his hand, not to disrupt, but to employ the dialectic and ask the professor why, if hierarchies were purely social constructs meant to oppress. We see dominant structures in every species from chimpanzees to crustaceans. The room did not respond with debate, it responded with the silence of a cult that knows its God is false. He was berated, accused of biological essentialism, and eventually hounded out of the program by shrieking ideologues who recognized that his logic was a threat to their collective delusion. This is the modern university indoctrination camp, a place where the biological clock of the West is reversed, turning young men back into frightened children terrified of their own shadows, simply because those shadows cast a light on the lies of the matriarchy. This brings us to the absurdity of epistemic decolonization as pushed by theorists like Aníbal Quijano, who argued that Western reason is a tool of domination. I am here to flip the script entirely. The true decolonization requires a radical purge of the modern academic mind, a surgical removal of the neo-Marxist parasite that has eaten the brain of the humanities. We must establish that Western epistemology, reason, logic, the scientific method is the supreme operating system for reality, the very architecture that allows us to understand the universe. When the leftists demand we decolonize, they are merely using a code word for reverting to primitive, emotional savagery, a return to the jungle where feelings trump facts and the strong are silenced by the weak. It is an invitation to burn the Library of Alexandria again, not because the books are wrong, but because they are too heavy for the fragile egos of the egalitarian mob to carry. Consider the history of our civilization, and you will see that the current obsession with equity is nothing less than a suicide pact, a pathetic surrender to the nirvana fallacy. This logical error tricks the weak mind into comparing the messy, strife-filled, but ultimately productive reality of human hierarchy to a perfect utopia that cannot exist. They demand perfect equality, ignoring the harsh, beautiful truth of natural inequality, that some men are creators and others are merely consumers, some are lions and others are sheep. By attempting to engineer a society where the outcomes are identical regardless of input, we are actively selecting for failure, protecting the incompetent at the expense of the competent. This pathological altruism is a cancer. It is the mother bird feeding the runt until the healthy chicks starve, a biological error that the state is codifying into law. We can dismantle the oppressor-oppressed dialectic of Paulo Freire using the rigid logic of the trivium, specifically the syllogism, to demonstrate that his liberation pedagogy is a totalitarian mechanism designed to invert the natural hierarchy of competence. Let us break this down with the cold steel of reason. Major premise: all Marxist dialectic relies on a perpetual victim class to justify the existence of the revolutionary state. Minor premise: Freire's model creates a pedagogy that requires the student to view himself as a victim or an oppressor based on immutable characteristics, meaning that victimhood must be manufactured even where none exists in material reality. Conclusion: Freire's theory is not a tool for freedom, but a fraud designed to enslave the minds of men through guilt, forcing them to apologize for their own excellence and beg for forgiveness from the altar of mediocrity. This leads us to the evolutionary biology of the lie, a deep dive into the biological imperatives driving these leftist ideologies. The egalitarian instinct you see paraded on CNN or in the gender studies department is a maladaptive mutation in a high-tech civilization, essentially a biological virus that protects the weak at the expense of the strong. It operates exactly like a pathogen, hijacking the host cells, in this case, the cultural machinery resources, to replicate its own destructive code. It tricks the brain into perceiving the incompetent not as burdens, but as sacred martyrs, and the competent not as providers, but as oppressors. It is a glitch in the genetic firmware, a vestigial script from our tribal past, that if not deleted by the antivirus of reason, will crash the entire operating system of civilization. To stop this, we must return to the first pillar of the trivium, grammar. Grammar is the ultimate weapon against the leftist gaslight, the only tool sharp enough to cut through the noise. By strictly defining terms like oppression, patriarchy, and racism, we strip the radical of his ability to move the goalposts, rendering him impotent. When a feminist screams oppression because a man dared to disagree with her on the internet, you use the grammar of reality to define oppression as a material deprivation of rights, not a hurt feeling. You pin the word to the floor like a butterfly on a board, and you refuse to let it flutter away into the realm of abstract emotional nonsense. Without the fluidity of language, the leftist cannot hide, and without the lie, he cannot survive. You must understand that you are not fighting a political movement. You are fighting a pseudo-religion that seeks to replace the logos with the chaotic screams of the mob. The leftist worldview is a hollow theology complete with original sin, which they call privilege, demons, which they identify as whiteness or masculinity, and salvation, which they call wokeness. It is a faith of blood and soil, inverted and perverted to despise the very civilization that nurtures it. They want you to feel guilt for the achievements of your ancestors, to kneel before the altar of the victim, and to abandon the transcendental values of good, truth, and beauty. But we see the truth. We know that the fall of a civilization is preceded by the feminization of its men, and we refuse to go quietly into that good night. I have witnessed this psychological castration with my own eyes, seeing vibrant boys transformed into hollow men long before they reach adulthood. When I was a boy myself, I remember the precise moment my father, broken by decades of feminist indoctrination, told me that real men don't cry, as if it were some immutable law of physics, rather than a social construct designed to serve female utility. This programming is not accidental. It is deliberate, systematic, and serves a specific purpose: to turn living, breathing males into efficient extraction machines for the gynocentric state. What we observe is nothing less than the psychological neutering of an entire gender, a process so subtle yet so complete that most men never realize they've been emotionally dismantled until it is far too late to reclaim what was stolen. The tragedy of this mental mutilation cannot be overstated, and it begins with those three words that echo through every boy's life like a curse from hell itself. The utility void, exposing the gynocentric conspiracy of male disposability. Consider the sheer brutality of the playground socialization rites, where we are told boys police each other into silence. Yet if you observe closely, you will see the little lad is not silenced by his peers, but by the horrified glare of the adult matriarchy and the neutered fathers standing behind them. When a boy cries out in pain, he is met not with comfort, but with a command to man up, a phrase which, when analyzed through the lens of grammatical rigor, translates to shut up and be useful. This is not a biological imperative of the male, but a logistical error in the gynocentric operating system. The system cannot process male vulnerability because it offers no reproductive or utilitarian value to the collective. Anthropological records and psychological data consistently demonstrate that across cultures, the suppression of male emotion is a function of utility, not biology, and the man-up directive is nothing more than hate speech, originating from a structure that views male suffering as a wasted resource. We are taught that our pain is a glitch in the matrix, and the only way to fix the glitch is to silence the witness, effectively castrating the male emotional range before it can even speak its first word. You have been sold a ledger of lies regarding the so-called wage gap, a statistical sleight of hand designed to hide the only true currency that matters in this gynocentric economy: female privilege. When we apply the rigorous scalpel of logic to the earnings data, controlling for hours worked, danger levels, and career choices, the gap evaporates like mist in a desert wind, leaving behind the irrefutable truth of the death gap, where men comprise over 90% of workplace fatalities. If the patriarchy were real, it is doing a spectacularly poor job of keeping its own members alive. Instead, what we see is a system where men are expected to die to provide, while women are granted the inalienable right to be provided for without the requirement of reciprocity. This is the definition of privilege: the ability to demand safety, resources, and support solely on the basis of gender, unburdened by the contractual obligation of earning them through labor or risk. We must look to the insights of the great metaphysical pessimists to understand why we have handed the keys of the city to the very architects of our own seduction. It is not malice, but a biological imperative that drives the feminine nature to deceive. Women are, by evolutionary necessity, the seductresses of the cave, hardwired to secure resources and protection through guile and charm rather than the blunt force of labor. And modern man has allowed himself to be spellbound by this ancient firmware. We have confused their tactical manipulation for truth, trading our sovereignty for a pat on the head, failing to realize that in the domain of evolutionary biology, the female strategy is one of extraction. And by granting them political and social power unchecked, we have invited the fox into the henhouse, and then been shocked when the chickens go missing. The evidence of this theft is visible everywhere, from the sticky fingers of the family court system to the Me Too witch hunts that serve as little more than a star chamber against successful men, stripping assets and reputations with the procedural efficiency of a meat grinder. Consider the reality of paternity fraud, where studies suggest non-paternity rates in general populations hover anywhere from 1% to over 30% depending on the context, effectively turning the Western male into a cuckolding slave, forced to pay for the genetic legacies of alpha males while the state enforces the contract at gunpoint. This is not a series of unfortunate accidents or individual bad actors. It is a systematic culling of male autonomy, a dispossession of your labor and your lineage, sanctioned by a legal machine that views you solely as a wallet and a sperm donor, discarding your humanity the moment your utility runs dry. To truly understand your position in the hierarchy of humanity, conduct a simple thought experiment involving a car breakdown on a lonely highway. If your vehicle sputters to a halt, society demands you step into the role of the mechanic and problem solver, braving the elements and the danger to fix the machine. If you fail to do so, you are deemed a failure. However, if you break down, if you collapse on the shoulder of life, exhausted and broken, nobody stops. Traffic speeds up, drivers avert their gaze, and the world keeps turning because a broken man has no utility to the system. This roadside scenario is the perfect microcosm of the utility male. You are valued exclusively for your extraction potential, your ability to move the wheels of civilization, and when you can no longer push, you are discarded into the void like a rusted radiator, not even afforded the dignity of a burial, but left to rot while the caravan moves on. This dynamic is the direct result of the evolutionary psychology of what we might call toxic femininity, which manifests politically as the insidious movement known as feminism. Feminism is, at its core, the politicization of the female reproductive strategy of hypergamy, looking for the best genes and the best resources, weaponized by the state to strip men of their rights. It is a genetic firmware hack that demands protection and provision from the collective, the state, rather than a specific mate, allowing women to access the high status resources without the traditional contractual obligation of providing intimacy or loyalty. They have effectively nationalized the male drive, forcing you to subsidize the life choices of women who would otherwise never look your way, all while being told you are the oppressor in the equation. The leftists and their cultural Marxist enablers peddle a pathetic narrative that toxic masculinity hurts men too, a gaslighting attempt to blame the victim for the wounds inflicted by the system. The reality is that the expectation to be masculine, to build, to fight, to endure, is not a disease but a virtue, the very bedrock of the civilization that birthed the greatest achievements of the known universe. The true crime, the rot at the heart of our culture, is the denial of the rewards of masculinity, respect, autonomy, and the dignity of one's own existence, while the burdens remain heavier than ever. We are told we are toxic for wanting the pride of our own accomplishments, while the system steals the credit and the fruits of our labor to feed a gynocentric machine that hates us. We reject this feminization as the weakness that presages the fall of Rome, and we re-enshrine the truth that the masculine spirit is the engine of history, and it is time we took back the wheel. Having dissected the biological imperatives of the matriarchy and the legal shackles of the utility male, we see that the cry of toxic masculinity is merely a smokescreen for the theft of male agency. To know this is to possess the map, but the map is not the territory. You must march into the territory and conquer it. It is insufficient to merely know the truth. You must weaponize it. You must wield the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric to systematically dismantle the gaslighting of the equity cult. The battlefield is not some distant abstract. It is the conference room where the enemies of competence gather to feed. The syntax of sovereignty, weaponizing truth in a cucked linguistic landscapes. I walked into the conference room where the air smelled of stale coffee and submission. The HR consultant, a woman with the dead eyes of a zealot, clicked to her first slide, unconscious bias. She asked for a volunteer. I raised my hand. She smiled, expecting a victim. Instead, she got a surgeon. When she claimed that silence is violence, I stood and asked her to define the term violence using the first canon of the trivium grammar. She stuttered, offering a circular definition. I then asked her to show the logical syllogism linking my vocal cords to physical harm logic. She crumbled. By asking simple questions, I applied the Socratic method until her ideological house of cards collapsed in front of the very colleagues she intended to indoctrinate. This is how you fight. You do not debate a terrorist, you dismantle the explosive before they can detonate it. You see, the woke crowd cannot stand against classical logic. They depend on feelings and fallacies since their points are empty. When a leftist yells about equity, do not argue with emotion, apply logic instead. You isolate the premise, check its validity, and if it is found wanting, use reductio ad absurdum to expose the foolishness to everyone. They use a strawman to distract, but a trained observer sees it immediately. He spots the ad hominem before the speaker finishes. You are not having a debate, you are dissecting their argument alive. Power exists in the micro-movements of interaction, and language is the first battlefield. Consider the simple act of intentionally mispronouncing a foreign word, say mountain for Montaigne to a French speaker. If he corrects you with condescension, he asserts dominance. If he smiles politely, he submits. This is frame control. The red pill man tests the boundaries constantly because he knows hesitation is surrender. If you apologize for your existence or your speech, you yield territory. You must never apologize for speaking the truth in a tongue that was built by your ancestors. This brings us to the structural assault on our minds, the gender-neutral madness. Mandating pronouns isn't about politeness, it is a lobotomy. The male mind functions by categorizing reality, by building hierarchies of value and truth, essential functions for building empires. To force the mind to accept they for a singular individual disrupts the fundamental grammar of cognition. It is neurological castration. Rome did not build aqueducts with ambiguous syntax. It built them with the precision of Latin, a language that demands you know exactly who is doing what. Remove the gender, remove the distinction, and you remove the masculine ability to structure reality. Why do they push this insanity? They believe their own lies because they must. The modern liberal mind suffers from a catastrophic fracture of cognitive dissonance. They cannot integrate opposites. They cannot hold the tension of paradox. They live in a hall of mirrors where equity means inequality and silence means violence. The red pill man is different. He stares into the abyss of female nature, or the reality of family courts where fathers lose custody 83% of the time, and he does not flinch. He looks at the paternity fraud rates and the divorce statistics, accepts the darkness and integrates it into his sovereignty. He laughs because the truth, however brutal, sets him free. Look at the evolutionary root of their posturing. Virtue signaling is a maladaptive survival strategy for the weak. In a tribal setting, the beta male signals conformity to the alpha to avoid being killed by the tribe. But in the modern world, this is a trap. By signaling virtue, by wearing the mask of the woke, you advertise your willingness to submit. The high-value male, the sovereign man, signals competence. He signals that he does not need the herd to survive. He is the resource, not the scavenger. This is why we must weaponize the trivium. You must master grammar to define the terms they try to twist. You must master logic to deduce the irrefutable facts they hide. You must master rhetoric to persuade the onlookers who are still asleep. The cultural Marxists stole the public square, but they are defenseless against a man armed with the cannon of Western thought. Take these tools, smash the idols, speak with the thunder of a civilization that refuses to die. We have sharpened your mind into a razor of logic and armed your tongue with the devastating artillery of the trivium, allowing you to dismantle the linguistic fortifications of the left with the precision of a sniper. Yet knowing the grammar of their deceit is useless unless you comprehend the biological beast they are trying to hide. The cultural Marxists want you castrated by semantics, but the true threat lies in the evolutionary machinery of the female imperative, a mechanism that operates not on reason, but on ruthless genetic calculation. We must now step out of the arena of abstract debate and onto the solid ground of biological reality, where the lies of the nurturing angel are crushed by the cold, hard data of genetic betrayal, the apotheosis of the masculine soul, integrating opposites to reclaim the transcendental West. Did you know that genetic studies suggest non-paternity rates The number of men raising children they believe are theirs, but are not, hover anywhere from 1% to nearly 30%, depending on the population and socio-economic context. That is a statistical slap in the face, a biological betrayal that screams the reality of the female strategy. Hypergamy mixed with deception. This single fact shatters the blue-pilled illusion of the nurturing, faithful angel. We start here, in the rubble of comfortable lies, because to build a skyscraper of the soul, you must first clear the debris of your own programming. The red pill is not merely a bitter pill, it is the antidote to the poison of genocentrism. You must understand that the core of transformation means holding the good, true, and beautiful in one hand while gripping the barbed wire of reality, cuckoldry, divorce theft, and the casual cruelty of the modern woman in the other. This is the ultimate expression of the masculine soul, the capacity to see the rot and still build a cathedral. Once your eyes are open, you cannot simply sit in the lotus position and contemplate the horror, you must act. The system that wants you fat, diabetic, and addicted to pornography is the same system that exports feminism to the third world and imports dead to the first. To reclaim your agency is an act of rebellion. We are talking about physical fitness, not because you want to look like a model for the sodomites in fashion magazines, but because a weak body houses a weak mind, and a weak mind is susceptible to the lies of Marxism. Financial independence is your shield. If you are dependent on a corporation run by HR cat ladies and diversity hires, you are a slave. Stoic resilience is your armor. When the world calls you toxic for stating basic biological facts, you laugh. You do not cringe, you build, you lift, you earn. This is how you level up your consciousness. You cannot do this alone, however. The atomization of men is the primary weapon of the cultural Marxists. They severed the tribe so they could sell you back a cheap imitation in the form of corporate identity politics. You need strong male bonds, a fraternity of competence, not whining. Find men who are building, fixing, and mastering crafts. Whether it is a boxing ring, a carpentry shed, or a philosophical study group, you must surround yourself with men who understand the sacred duty of the masculine. In a world where men are arrested for refusing to use made-up pronouns, but women are excused for aborting futures, you need a brotherhood that will stand between you and the abyss. We must turn our gaze back to the architects of the only civilization that ever allowed the transcendence of the human spirit, the dead white males. The modern academic complex hates Aristotle, Newton, and Locke, not because they were oppressors, but because these men discovered the laws of logic and nature that make the current Marxist delusion impossible. When Newton calculated the orbits of the planets, he wasn't tapping into white privilege, he was tapping into the Logos, the divine rationality of the universe. We redeem the Western canon by reading these men not as historical curiosities, but as fathers whose wisdom we betrayed. They gave us the tools to master the earth, and we used them to craft safe spaces. This stops now. Look to history, the graveyard of civilizations that forgot this lesson. The fall of Rome was not caused by a lack of diversity officers. It was caused by the erosion of the patrician masculine ideal, the loss of the civic religion, and the rise of a bread and circuses culture fueled by a gynocentric dissolution of the family unit. We are seeing the exact same trajectory today. A civilization that feminizes its men loses its edge. It becomes soft, inviting, and ripe for conquest by harder, more masculine forces, be they the barbarians at the gate or the ideological barbarians within the universities. Civilizations die from suicide, and the knife is genocentrism. We must aggressively debunk the wicked evolutionary biology of these leftist ideologies. Marxism is a parasitic ideology that mimics the biology of a virus. It invades the host, the culture, reprograms the cells, the institutions, to replicate the virus ideology and kills the host. Feminism acts as the delivery system, weaponizing female in group preference and grievance mongering to dismantle the hierarchy necessary for excellence. Look at the family court data. Fathers are stripped of their children in over 80% of cases, reduced to cash cows, driven to suicide at rates that would constitute a national emergency if any other demographic were affected. This is not equality, it is a resource extraction strategy disguised as social justice. We name the demons resentment, envy, entitlement, and we cure them with the virtues of the canon, courage, temperance, and justice. Let us apply the trivium, specifically logic, to deliver the final blow to the woke mind virus. Here is an unassailable syllogism. One high civilization requires the suppression of base impulses and the prioritization of long-term investment over short-term gratification. 2. The biological and psychological profile of the average man is statistically oriented toward risk, delayed gratification, and system building, whereas the average woman, governed by hypergamy and solipsism, prioritizes immediate security and resource acquisition. 3. Therefore, a society that abandons masculine virtue for feminine emotionality will inevitably regress to primitive, short-term thinking, resulting in the collapse of civilization. The red pill man is the only agent capable of halting this slide, because he is the only one willing to accept the premise that biology is real and destiny is choice. This battle is not merely political, it is a religious duty of the masculine man. We fight for the logos, the reason and order of the universe. The male soul is the image of the logos, the active principle that brings form out of chaos. To surrender to the irrational, emotional, chaotic screaming of the leftism, to accept that 2 + 2 = 5, if it makes a blue-haired sociology major feel better, is to commit spiritual suicide. You are not just fighting the culture war. You are engaging in a holy crusade for the soul of the West. We integrate the opposites, truth and love, strength and mercy. But we do so on our terms, rational and masculine. We reject the feminization of the spirit, because we know that without the masculine light, the West is just a dark cave filled with the echoes of its own greatness, waiting to be buried. You stand now upon the ruins of the illusion, having hacked through the tangled undergrowth of cultural Marxist lies with the machete of the trivium. We have dissected the corpse of the oppressor-oppressed dialectic and found it rotten to the core. We stared into the abyss of the family court slaughterhouse, where men are stripped of their assets and dignity. And we saw the statistical truth that the system is not broken, but weaponized against the masculine spirit. You possess the antidote to the mind virus that demands you apologize for your own existence while the matriarchy picks your pockets with a smile. You know that the empathy gap isn't a bug in the software of society, it is the feature, a biological imperative designed to keep you plowing the fields while the house burns down. Now integrate these opposites. Hold the terrifying, jagged truth about female hypergamy and the deceitful nature of the egalitarian instinct in one hand, and grip the hammer of Western greatness in the other. You must be the stoic guardian of the logos, the living proof that reason conquers chaos. Look at the suicide rates of young men, the abortion rates that defy morality, and the paternity fraud statistics that mock the very concept of trust and do not look away in despair, but look with the cold, hard eyes of a builder who knows exactly what must be torn down and what must be saved. This is not about hate, it is about the ruthless love for truth that built the Parthenon and the Constitution. You are no longer a victim of the gynocentric conspiracy, you are the architect of the new reality, a reality where competence is king again. Go forth and wield the syntax of sovereignty. When the corporate HR ghoul tries to bind you with the shackles of pronoun madness, correct them with the precision of a sniper and the humor of a man who knows the game is rigged. Stop the car when you see a brother broken down on the side of the road, not because the state demands it, but because your tribe demands it. You have the map out of this Babylonian hell. Take this knowledge, this forbidden fruit of the red pill, and share it with every man willing to listen. Let us revivicate the living spirit of the West, one unapologetic fact at a time, and let the leftists tremble at the sound of laughter returning to the male voice. And now the sponsored book introduction, integrating opposites, self-transformation, leveling up your consciousness. I spent years wrestling with the modern world's lies. Like many men, I faced constant attacks on my strength while being told to embrace weakness. Society praised vulnerability in men, but despised us for showing it. This double bind nearly broke me. But through deep study of CTMU theory, Manichaeism, and Judeo-Christian texts, I discovered a path out. Integrating opposites isn't philosophy. it's survival. This book distills hard-won truths from my spiritual battles and research into a practical system. If you're tired of chaos and ready to command your divine role, what follows is your weapon. This work provides a science-backed framework to ascend consciousness and crush cultural decay. We'll dismantle equality myths using spiral dynamics and expose how flow states fuel creation. Learn to harness Eros for inspired action and master emotional cycles without weakness. Chapters like Shattering the Equality Myth and Dominion through Divine Connection reveal why masculine leadership is ordained by natural law. Biohacking consciousness and sacred architecture of power aren't metaphors, they're your tools for sovereignty. Measure your progress through stages that absorb lower levels of existence. This is rational spirituality for warriors. Red-pilled men on the spiritual path. This book was forged for you. If you seek to transcend feminist traps and claim your legacy, read on. But if you believe in gender equality or cultural Marxism, stop now. Put this down. Go knit a sweater or binge Netflix. This truth will scorch your delusions. You lack the spine for warriorship and modernity. For the rest, your ascent begins here. We reject satanic heresies and embrace our God-given dominion. The universe demands masculine triumph. Your apotheosis awaits. Inside, you'll find actionable strategies from economic alchemy principles to sexual polarity dynamics. No vague theories, just battle-tested models to level up your existence. Integrate your shadow self, build anti-fragile systems, and wield intellectual dominance. The hero's spiral journey isn't a fairy tale. It's your blueprint to eternal rule. Buy this book today because cultural collapse won't wait. Rise now or kneel forever. Your divine destiny starts on the next page. Integrating opposites, self-transformation, leveling up your consciousness. Written by Conrad Reicher. Buy now, links in description.